April 21st, 2026, the deadline day. For weeks, the question hanging over Pima County was whether Sheriff Chris Nanos would comply with the Board of Supervisors' formal demand, or whether the board would have to decide what happens next. The board had voted 5-0. The statute was invoked. The legal mechanism was in place. The county had hired outside counsel. Everyone was watching the clock. And then, at approximately 2 p.m. on April 21st, a document arrived. Not Nanos in person. Not sworn testimony in the chamber. Not even a direct statement from the sheriff himself. What arrived was a 22-page letter written by his attorney, James M. Cool, and submitted on his behalf, addressed to the Pima County Board of Supervisors. County Administrator Jan Lesher walked back into the room where the board was meeting, announced that the response had been received, confirmed it had been released publicly, and that hard copies were being distributed. Then she said the 4 words that tell you everything about where this process actually stands. I have not read it. Neither had the board. It had just arrived. Board Chair Jen Allen moved immediately to postpone any substantive discussion until the next scheduled meeting, May 12, 2026. The board approved the delay unanimously. So after weeks of ultimatums and 5-0 votes and territorial-era statute invocations and executive sessions with outside counsel and a community that has been watching this process while Nancy Guthrie has been missing for nearly 80 days, what the board actually has in its hands as of April 21st is a 22-page attorney's letter that nobody had read yet, and they will not discuss it publicly until May 12th. That is where the accountability process for the sheriff overseeing the Nancy Guthrie investigation currently stands. But the letter itself matters, because what is in it is more revealing than whether the board reviews it today or in 3 weeks. Before we go into what Nanos' attorney actually admitted in that letter, and what it means alongside the single most significant investigative development in this case in weeks, subscribe to Unclosed Files right now and hit the notification bell. The accountability story and the investigation story converged this week in a way that deserves the most careful analysis we can give it. Hit the like button. Drop a comment telling me your most important question about where this case is right now. Every comment gets read. Subscribe and let us get into what actually happened. First, the person at the center of all of this. Nancy Guthrie was last seen at her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, on the evening of January 31st, 2026. She left a family dinner. She was driven home. Her garage door closed at 9:50 p.m. In the early hours of February 1st, her pacemaker stopped syncing with her phone at 2:28 a.m. Her blood was found on the front porch. She has not been seen since. The FBI released doorbell camera footage showing a masked, armed figure at her door. The suspect has not been arrested. Nancy has been missing for 83 days. Everything else in this video, the sheriff, the letter, the DNA, the lab, exists in the shadow of that fact. She is not a political argument. She is a person, and the people responsible for finding her have been operating inside a crisis of institutional credibility that they did not earn and did not deserve to be managing while trying to solve a case of this complexity. Now let us look at what Cool's letter actually says, because it is the most specific public accounting of the Nanos record that has ever been put into writing by someone speaking on his behalf. The board had asked 4 categories of questions: employment history at the El Paso Police Department, disciplinary actions against Lieutenant Heather Lappin and Sergeant Aaron Cross, cooperation with federal immigration enforcement, budget management. The letter addressed all 4. On the employment history, which is the question at the center of the perjury allegation, the one that started all of this, Cool's letter was precise in a way that is also a specific confirmation of the core problem. He wrote, "It is 100% correct that Sheriff Nanos was never suspended during his 4 decades of decorated and faithful service with the Pima County Sheriff's Department. However, Sheriff Nanos was suspended more than 40 years ago while employed by El Paso Police Department." Read that sentence carefully. His attorney is confirming in writing on behalf of the client that Nanos was suspended at El Paso. The Arizona Republic had reported 8 suspensions during his tenure there, for use of force, for profanity and threatening behavior, for appearing at an off-duty gambling establishment, for habitual tardiness, for insubordination, for dereliction of duties. One suspension involved beating a handcuffed suspect with a flashlight until the man required hospital admission. That specific incident led to a suspension that is documented in the employment file. Nanos was not indicted for that incident. He was suspended for it. The problem is that in a sworn deposition in December 2025, months before any of this became public, before the Arizona Republic's reporting, before the board's formal action, Nanos was asked directly whether he had ever been suspended during his time in law enforcement. He testified he had not. Kuhl's letter argues that Nanos's deposition testimony was in the context of Arizona's peace officers' Bill of Rights, and that his statement referred to his Pima County service, not his El Paso tenure. That is the legal thread his attorney is pulling. But the statute the board invoked does not require the board to find perjury. It does not require a criminal standard of proof. What it requires is that the county officer comply with the demand for information, and what the documented record now contains, in the attorney's own letter, is a direct confirmation that suspensions existed at El Paso, that they were not disclosed in the deposition, and that the public resume had listed El Paso service through 1984, when it actually ended in 1982. Kuhl's explanation for the resignation from El Paso is that it occurred in the wake of a dispute with a supervisor over the towing of vehicles. The Arizona Republic's reporting described the record differently. A resignation submitted in lieu of termination following a sustained disciplinary history. Both accounts agree that the departure was in 1982. Both accounts agree that the public resume had said 1984. The explanation for the 2-year discrepancy is described by the Sheriff's Department as an administrative error on the website. The letter does not dispute the factual discrepancy, it explains it. That is not a denial. That is an accounting. And the accounting leaves in place the central documented tension, that a man who swore under oath that he had not been suspended in law enforcement is now represented by an attorney who confirms in writing that he was suspended more than 40 years ago, the letter says, at El Paso. The legal argument is that the question was about Pima County. The factual record is that the question was about law enforcement service, and the answer given was inaccurate. The board will sit with that letter until May 12th. They will review it. They will determine whether the response is substantive enough to satisfy the statute's compliance requirement, or whether what arrived is technically present, but substantively insufficient. That determination matters enormously for what comes next. Here is the specific legal reality that has emerged through the reporting on this process. Arizona Revised Statute Section 11253A gives the board the authority to demand reports from county officers and to remove them from office if they refuse to comply. The mechanism for removal is non-compliance. What it does not clearly address, what has no Arizona case law precedent, is what happens when an officer responds, but the board believes the response is inadequate. The statute provides a path for refusal. It does not clearly provide an equivalent path for unsatisfactory answers. Nanos filed a response. Whether that response satisfies the statute is a legal question that his attorney and the board's outside counsel are now going to have to work through. The answer to that question determines whether the accountability process advances or stalls. And here is what matters most about all of this for the investigation itself. The FBI's Assistant Director of Public Affairs, Ben Williamson, made a statement this week that is more operationally significant than anything the board or the sheriff produced on April 21st. He posted on X, "This is not new evidence or information. FBI asked to test this DNA 2 months ago with the same technology we've always had, when the local sheriff instead sent it to a private lab. Any further developments we will share as soon as appropriate." What he is describing is a specific documented sequence. DNA evidence, including a hair sample, was collected from inside Nancy Guthrie's home in the days after she disappeared. The FBI requested that sample 2 months ago, in February 2026, to run advanced testing through the FBI's national laboratory. The Pima County Sheriff's Department instead sent it to a private lab in Florida that the department uses. That private lab has been working on the sample for 11 weeks. It has now transferred the original hair sample to the FBI laboratory for testing. That sequence is not a routine bureaucratic handoff between cooperating agencies. That is the FBI's Public Affairs Director explicitly stating on the record that the FBI requested the evidence 2 months ago and the local sheriff sent it somewhere else. The implication in that statement is precise, and it was put there deliberately. The FBI wanted the sample. The sheriff sent it to a different lab. The sample sat in Florida for 11 weeks. It is now at the FBI. The FBI lab has capabilities that most private labs do not. Former FBI agent Greg Rogers told Parade specifically, "The FBI lab has certain DNA testing capabilities that most local labs don't, such as nuclear DNA, Y chromosome DNA, and mitochondrial DNA. Those tests are often used on shed hair fragments, which are an issue in the Guthrie case. The hair sample is described as rootless, a hair without an attached follicle. Rootless hair is historically more difficult to extract usable DNA from than hair with a root. But new technology has changed what is possible with rootless hair. The San Francisco forensics lab Astrea, which helped crack the Gilgo Beach serial killer case, is now believed to be involved in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, according to Fox News Digital. C.C. Moore, the chief forensic genealogist at Parabon Nano Labs, told Fox News she is confident investigators will want to use Astrea, given how successfully that lab has worked rootless hair evidence in high-profile cases. Moore is the genealogist whose methodology contributed to identifying the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years. She said this week about the hair, "It's all going to come down to that hair sample. Does it exist within the realm of a relative that would have used one of those DNA ancestry databases, like 23andMe or Ancestry.com? That's what it comes down to." What she is describing is the specific mechanism by which investigative genetic genealogy works. A partial DNA profile from the hair, even a rootless hair, is run through consumer DNA ancestry databases. The software identifies partial matches, the kind of partial match you would see between cousins or second cousins or distant relatives who have voluntarily submitted their DNA to a consumer service. From those partial matches, genealogists build a family tree outward, working through public records and genealogical databases until they narrow to a generation and then to an individual. That individual is then confirmed through separately collected DNA, a discarded coffee cup, a glass, a doorknob swab, gathered through surveillance. The confirmation is then definitive. This is the same methodology that produced a name after more than 40 years of failure in the Golden State Killer case. It is the same methodology that produced the identification of the Zodiac Killer's identity through genealogy, though that case was not charged. It is the methodology that has been applied in hundreds of cold cases across the country and has produced convictions. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer told Newsweek this week that the fact the evidence is starting now at the FBI lab means, in her words, the FBI is starting at ground zero. She said the process could take weeks or even months from this point. She also said that she does not know where in the home the hair was found, whether it was on the kitchen counter, found in sofa cushions, or recovered from Nancy's bed, and that the location matters enormously for how significant the sample is likely to be. A hair found in the bedroom, where a person who helped carry Nancy out of her home while she was sleeping would have been leaning over her bed, carries a different investigative weight than a hair found in a common area that could belong to any number of people with ordinary access to the home. Former FBI agent Steve Moore said on the Brian Enton Investigates podcast this week, "I would have just bundled up the entire bedsheet thing and tied it at the top so everything that was in the bed would go to the lab." He added, "I suspect Nancy was helped out of bed simply because of her age, and if you do that and you lean over the bed, why do people wear hair nets in restaurants? Because we know hair falls in food. Hair would have fallen in that bed." He described himself as very encouraged by the development. So the specific convergence of this week is this: the DNA evidence that the FBI wanted in February, that instead went to a Florida lab for 11 weeks, has now arrived at the FBI's National Laboratory. The FBI's own public affairs director confirmed the sequence publicly and with unmistakable implication about why it matters. The Gilgo Beach lab is believed to be involved. C.C. Moore's methodology is being applied. The hair is rootless, which matters, but new technology means rootless does not mean useless. And if the sample contains DNA from the person who helped carry Nancy out of her bedroom on the night of January 31st, the person who leaned over that bed in the dark, that DNA is now in the most capable forensic laboratory in the country. the same week that the sheriff's attorney was submitting a 22-page letter explaining why Nanos's deposition testimony about his El Paso suspensions should be read in a specific, limited context. The FBI was confirming that a critical piece of evidence was finally in their hands after 11 weeks of being somewhere else. Both of those things are real. Both matter. The difference is that one of them determines whether a man keeps his job. The other one may determine whether the person who took Nancy Guthrie from her home is identified and arrested. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer, who has been the most consistent and operationally specific outside voice on this investigation, put the DNA development in specific terms when she spoke to Newsweek. She said the absence of a root could prolong testing. She said she still does not know where in the home the hair was found. She said there is still much unknown. And then she said the sentence that defines the current state of this investigation. It's all going to come down to that hair sample, not the sheriff's letter, not the board's response to the letter on May 12th, not the recall petition gathering signatures toward a mid-July threshold. The hair, the rootless strand of hair that was collected from inside Nancy Guthrie's home in the days after she disappeared, that sat in a Florida lab for 11 weeks, that is now at the FBI's National Laboratory, being tested with capabilities that the private lab in Florida did not have. That is what this week was. A 22-page letter arrived on a deadline day, and the board postponed reviewing it for 3 weeks, and the FBI confirmed that evidence is now in the right lab. Of those two developments, one of them will define whether this case has a next chapter, and it is not the letter. The investigation is still active. No suspect has been publicly named. No arrest has been made. The combined reward in this case exceeds $1,200,000. $1 million from the Guthrie family, payable for information leading to Nancy's recovery, and $100,000 from the FBI for information leading to arrest and conviction, anonymously, both payable without requiring the person who comes forward to attach their name to anything. If you have information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, a face, a vehicle, a conversation, a name, any detail that seemed small at the time and looks different now, the tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Submit tips at tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's Department tip line is 520-351-4900. Subscribe to Unclosed Files. Hit the notification bell. We follow every verified development in this case as it happens, and we will be here when the hair sample produces an answer, whatever that answer turns out to be. This video was produced for informational and educational purposes only based on publicly available sources, including reporting from NewsNation, Newsweek, the Arizona Republic, Fox News Digital, ABC News, AZPM, AZ Luminaria, the Tucson Sentinel, and on the record statements from named credentialed professionals including Jennifer Coffindaffer, Steve Moore, Greg Rogers, C.C. Moore, and Ben Williamson of the FBI. No individual has been charged in connection with this case. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has maintained that it cooperated with the FBI throughout the investigation. The Board of Supervisors has postponed substantive review of Sheriff Nanos's April 21st response until May 12, 2026. All characterizations of the attorney's letter and the deposition record reflect publicly reported documented facts. This channel has no affiliation with the Guthrie family, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, or the FBI. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. The hair is in the right lab. And we will be here for every development that follows. Let us also examine something that has been underreported in the coverage of this week's developments, the specific statement from the FBI's Ben Williamson and what it reveals about the relationship between the Sheriff's Department and the federal investigators who have been co-leading this case. The FBI did not accidentally post that statement. The language was precise. The sequencing was deliberate. He said, FBI asked to test this DNA 2 months ago with the same technology we've always had, when the local sheriff instead sent it to a private lab. That construction is not neutral. It is not a bureaucratic update about evidence processing. The FBI's public affairs director is describing a specific choice that was made. The sheriff sent the evidence to a different destination than the one the FBI had requested, and he is describing it in a way that draws a clear line between what the FBI wanted and what actually happened. The Pima County Sheriff's Department responded through their social media account, writing, "This is not new information. The private lab we utilize in Florida continues to share information with the FBI lab and other partner labs across the country. DNA analysis remains ongoing." That response describes a relationship between labs in a way that suggests normal coordination. The FBI statement suggests something different, that there was a specific request, a specific deflection of that request, and that the evidence is now arriving at the intended destination 11 weeks later than it should have. Both of those statements are in the public record. They describe the same sequence from different perspectives, and the gap between them, the interpretation gap between normal coordination and 11 weeks of delay on critical evidence, is a gap that the board's review of Nanos' response on May 12th should address directly. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer was direct about what the delay means operationally. She told Newsweek, "The FBI is starting now at ground zero." What that means in practical terms is that the private Florida lab's work on the sample is not transferable as a foundation for what the FBI is now going to do. The FBI lab is not picking up where Florida left off. They are starting from the beginning with the original sample and their own technology. 11 weeks of elapsed time in a private lab did not advance the most capable analysis that could be applied to this evidence. It delayed it. That delay, in the context of everything else that is documented about the management of this investigation, is not a small footnote. It is a specific choice about where a critical piece of evidence went when it could have gone somewhere else. And the FBI chose this specific week, the week of the April 21st deadline, the week of the sheriff's 22-page attorney's letter, to put that sequence on the public record. Timing matters in institutional communication. The FBI does not accidentally time its public statements. They said what they said when they said it, and the meaning is not ambiguous. There is one more thread that deserves to be pulled before this video closes. Jennifer Coffindaffer has been one of the most consistently specific outside voices on this investigation, and she made a comment this week about the civilian search teams that has received less attention than it deserves. She has noted publicly that the Pima County Sheriff's Department has turned away proven civilian search organizations, Texas EquiSearch and the United Cajun Navy, without explanation. In her professional assessment, when established credible search organizations are turned away in an active missing persons case, it can mean one specific thing: that investigators have moved past the search phase. That they no longer need the field searched because they have formed a working theory of the crime that does not require organized ground searches. That reading is not certain. Coffindaffer is reading observable investigative behavior, not case files. But it is the reading of someone with 25 years of federal law enforcement pattern recognition, and it connects directly to something the sheriff himself said to NBC News, that investigators are definitely closer to the suspect. Definitely closer. His words, on the record. Attached to his name, the man whose own attorney had to confirm in writing that he was suspended at El Paso, who had a loaded, undeclared gun at a TSA checkpoint, whose own deputies voted unanimously to ask him to resign. That man sat down with NBC News and said on camera that his investigators are definitely closer to the person who took Nancy Guthrie from her home 83 days ago. Maybe he is managing optics. Maybe he is buying time. Maybe he is deflecting from the accountability storm around him by attaching himself to investigative progress he wants credit for. All of those interpretations are available. But there is also another interpretation, that he said it because it is true. That the task force that has been working full-time on this case for 83 days has actually made progress. That the DNA now in the FBI lab is the last major evidence gap that needs to close before the case that has been building from multiple directions simultaneously reaches the point where a name can be attached to a warrant. The investigation is not the sheriff. The FBI task force is running parallel to and independent of whatever political story is consuming the county's attention right now. The DNA is in the FBI's hands. The Gilgo Beach lab is believed to be involved. C.C. Moore's methodology is being applied. Former FBI agent Steve Moore is very encouraged. And somewhere in this investigation, in a file that no one outside the task force has read, in an analysis that is being run right now in a federal laboratory, the answer to who is responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance may be closer than the 83 days of public silence suggests. She deserves that answer. Her family deserves it. And the investigation that has been running, despite everything that has happened around it, deserves to finish the work it started. The hair is in the right lab. The deadline came and went. May 12th is the next date to watch. And wherever this investigation is right now, however many filters have been applied to the evidence, however many family trees are being built from partial DNA matches, however many cell tower records have been analyzed for devices that went dark on the right nights, it is still running. That has been true every day for 83 days. And it will be true tomorrow. There is a dimension of this week's convergence that the coverage has largely missed. And it is the dimension that tells you the most about where this investigation actually is versus where it appears to be from the outside. The board accountability story and the DNA development story share a common thread. Both are about what happens when the wrong choice is made early in a process, and the consequences of that choice compound over time. With the sheriff, the documented record describes a pattern of choices that began 40 years ago in El Paso and continued through a deposition in December 2025, through an airport security checkpoint in November 2024, through the handling of a federal investigation that the FBI wanted to lead more completely from day one. Each individual choice was probably manageable in isolation. Together, in the context of an 83-day investigation with no arrest and a globally watched family asking for answers, they created a crisis of credibility that is consuming institutional energy that should be directed at finding Nancy Guthrie. With the DNA, the documented record describes a specific choice. A critical biological sample requested by the FBI's National Laboratory in February was sent instead to a private lab in Florida. That sample has now been transferred to the FBI, 11 weeks later. 11 weeks during which the most capable laboratory in the country was not applying its most advanced technology to a piece of evidence that could break the case. Whether the Florida lab's work during those 11 weeks advanced the investigation in ways that the FBI would not have replicated, whether there is a legitimate forensic argument for the sequence that unfolded, is a question that has not been answered publicly. What has been answered publicly by the FBI's own communications director is that the FBI wanted the sample in February and did not get it until April. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer's assessment of the current state, that the FBI is starting at ground zero, suggests that whatever happened in Florida during those 11 weeks, the FBI is not treating it as a complete foundation for what comes next. They are starting their own process with the original sample. And that process, C.C. Moore and Greg Rogers and Steve Moore have all said in various ways this week, is the most capable process that exists for extracting a usable DNA profile from a rootless hair and running it through the genetic genealogy pipeline. The question this investigation has been building toward for 83 days is not whether the technology exists to identify the person responsible. It does exist. C.C. Moore said directly that multiple cases have been solved using rootless hair with new technology. The Gilgo Beach killer was identified with evidence that would have been unusable 5 years earlier. The Golden State Killer was identified after 40 years. The technology is not the constraint. The constraint has always been whether the evidence collected from Nancy Guthrie's home contains DNA from the person or persons responsible. DNA that was deposited during 41 minutes inside a protected interior environment on the night of February 1, 2026. Whether the hair sample is from the person who helped carry Nancy out of her bedroom, whether the mixed biological sample recovered from other surfaces in the home contains a separable profile that points toward a specific individual, whether the chain from evidence to profile to genealogy tree to name is complete. The FBI lab is now in a position to answer those questions with capabilities the Florida lab did not have. That is what this week actually produced, not a 22-page letter. Not a board meeting postponement, not a recall petition or a statutory argument or a deposition dispute. A critical piece of evidence is now in the right place. That is the sentence that defines this week in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, and it is the sentence that matters most for whether the next significant development in this case is a legal argument about what a county statute means, or an arrest. Nancy Guthrie, missing since February 1st, 2026. 83 days, no arrest, no publicly named suspect. The hair is in the FBI lab. The investigation is still running. We will be here for every development that follows. The board's decision to delay its review until May 12th carries one additional implication worth naming directly, because it speaks to the timeline of accountability versus the timeline of the investigation. May 12th is 3 weeks away. The recall petition has until mid-July to gather its threshold of verified signatures. The statute's removal mechanism, if the board determines Nanos's response is substantively inadequate, would require additional legal steps that have no established Arizona precedent. The legal process is slow. The accountability clock is moving, but it is moving in weeks and months. The investigation's clock is different. DNA analysis does not have a public calendar. The genealogy pipeline does not have a scheduled hearing date. The cell tower analysis and the tattoo database search and the digital forensics requests to Google and Apple are not subject to board vote postponements. Those processes run on their own timelines, determined by the complexity of the evidence and the capabilities of the technology being applied. What is possible? What the convergence of evidence threads in this case has been pointing toward for weeks is that the investigative clock and the accountability clock do not arrive at the same moment, that the investigation produces an answer before the board finishes reviewing the sheriff's letter, that the person who took Nancy Guthrie is identified and arrested while the political story about who oversees the county sheriff is still being argued in meetings and briefs and statutory interpretation disputes. That would be the most ironic possible outcome of 83 days of institutional failure and FBI co-leadership. The investigation solves itself despite the sheriff, not because of him. The evidence that was requested in February and arrived in April does what it needed to do. The task force that has been working in parallel with the county's dysfunction produces the result the county's dysfunction was threatening to prevent. That outcome is not certain, but it is documented as possible. The FBI is involved. The FBI's resources are engaged. The most capable forensic laboratory in the country has the sample. And the person who is responsible for what happened to Nancy Guthrie has been running from evidence they did not know they left behind. Biological trace material in a protected interior space, ink on a wrist visible in federal camera footage, a cell phone that pinged towers on 3 specific nights, a car on a back road 8 minutes after a pacemaker went dark. All of those threads are still running. May 12th is when the board talks about the letter. The investigation does not wait for May 12th. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. 83 days in, the evidence is finally in the right hands.